Hey everybody, this is Keith Ellison, your Attorney General, the People's Lawyer, for another edition of Affording Your Life. Hey, and I know too, that affording your life is one of the most important things any of us have to do. That's why we set up this podcast about working class economics. These are the economics that you deal with on an everyday basis. Things that you deal with going to the grocery store, payday loans, trying to deal with utility bills, these kind of economics. I remember watching the tube and watching people talk about the Dow Jones Industrial Average and the discount rate. And I was like, what in the world are these people even talking about? So I dug into it a little bit. But the fact is, we need some economics that you can use. Everyone, whether you're a mom, whether you're a working small business owner, or whether you're in politics, we all need to know about how to afford your life. So this week's topic is something I'm sure you're going to be interested in talking about: tariffs. And we're going to be joined by my good friend and a great scholar of economics, Dr. Lindsay Owens, Executive Director of Groundwork Collaborative. Prior to co-founding Groundwork Collaborative, Lindsay served in the office of Congressman Keith Ellison. Yep, that's me. And she was a chief of staff and legislative director. And I was very, very happy to be working with Lindsay, and so much so that I stay in touch with her now. Welcome back, Lindsay, to Affording Your Life.
Thanks for having me, Keith. It's really great to be here.
Oh yeah. Great to hear from you as always. Thanks for the great work that you do all the time for everybody. So, tariffs. Let's be clear, tariffs are a tax on imported goods charged to every company that purchases them, and these tariffs impact almost every country in the world that sells goods to American companies and consumers, impacting everything from cars to appliances to energy to food. Now, I would be the first to say that tariffs are not always bad. There are places for tariffs, but I cannot imagine an erratic tariff policy working the way that it's been implemented by this administration. So let me just ask you this. How do you think the average American consumer is going to be impacted by these Trump tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important conversation, and you're absolutely right. There are a whole host of reasons why a government would deploy tariffs. But my biggest fear right now is that we are getting the absolute worst case scenario when it comes to trade policy with President Trump. And that's for two reasons. We're getting all of the downside, which, to answer your question, is higher costs for consumers, but then we're not realizing any of the upside, which is that a stable, concerted, thoughtful tariff policy could help to restore American manufacturing, help to have a renaissance of making more things here at home. But because of the chaotic nature of the way in which he's deploying this, we're not going to get any of the new business creation in the U.S. because how could we? No business can make a decision to make a big capital investment in a plant or a factory or domestic manufacturing if they don't know if the tariff policy will be the same in 5 years, yet alone one day. And then they're also going to pass along all of those higher costs in the short and medium term. So I really think it's a worst case scenario. It's a total lose-lose. Consumers are getting hosed, but the upside for the American economy, for potential replenishment of manufacturing jobs, better paying jobs, I think is very, very low and unlikely.
Well, and doesn't the erratic nature of the implementation of this tariff system just cause pricing problems in and of itself? I mean, if you were to increase a tariff 20%, lower it by 20%, increase it by 20%, lower it by 20%, at the end of the day, you're going to cause higher costs, even if you go back to zero. Just the unpredictability of it and pricing in of that instability.
I think you're exactly right. I would go even further, but yes, you're gonna get companies passing along the tariffs. Consumers are ultimately going to pay the tariffed rate, so prices are going to go up. You're absolutely right. The business uncertainty is going to be negatively impacting Americans and American consumers and American workers, by the way. We may see, as demand flags, if prices go up, we may see layoffs and things like that. But the third thing I would say is when you're running this type of really inconsistent, chaotic tariff policy, you also actually make it more likely that companies will gouge consumers. And the reason for that is everyone is expecting higher prices. It is way too complicated to figure out which company actually had their tariff rate halved, so they don't need to charge you full freight anymore. And companies know that. So even if their tariff rate gets cut, once they've raised prices, they're just going to stick with the higher prices. And so it's a perfect storm.
Yeah, they're sticky on the upside. Once they go up, they tend not to come down.
That's right.
If they do, that means big time recession, doesn't it?
Much more likely to stick with higher prices. Maybe use discounting if they really have to, but discounting off the new higher price that they're going to stick with.
Yeah. So what are some of the goods that you see impacted that families are going to use? I mean, Trump used this example of going from I don't know, how many dollars did he say? It was like 30 down to 2 or something like that. I mean, it's not just toys though, is it? It's other items.
Yeah, so we put together a few examples at the Groundwork Collaborative of price hikes that American consumers are going to expect to pay. We did a set of analyses around summer prices that people will see increases on this summer. A great example, it's summer, time to fire up the grill. I know Minnesotans are getting outside. Weber, which is one of the largest grill companies, is urging shoppers to buy now because they're planning big price increases. This pre-tariff pricing, you're seeing a lot of that. Ace hardware stores in both Ohio and Georgia warned consumers that they could see price increases of as much as 30% due to tariffs on Weber grills. Another one, you can always forego the grill. Tougher, I think, to forego air conditioning in many parts of the United States. Air conditioning prices are skyrocketing. And we've also seen Lennox, which is one of the major HVAC manufacturers, has already implemented 2 rounds of price increases to offset Trump's tariffs, and has announced that price hikes of at least 7% on HVACs going forward. So I think big price hikes for sort of summer staples. The other topic we've taken a close look at is what we've called the baby tax, which is price hikes on items for new and expecting parents on things like car seats and strollers and high chairs. You may remember that about a week ago, Trump got into a big fight with the Walmart CFO, who announced price hikes. One of the examples that he gave in his earnings call that drew so much attention is that a $350 car seat made in China will cost an extra $100. I mean, that's a Walmart car seat coming in right under $500. I mean, that is just a huge haul for so many families. So seeing big hikes on things that are primarily made in China, like car seats and strollers and high chairs and things like that.
Well, let me ask you this, Lindsay. When we hear about like the pricing on items that are where you're going to see tariffs in a few weeks or a few months or 90 days or whatever, what happens to prices in that interim period? You know what I mean? Do prices just stay the same until the tariff comes in, or does the excess demand somehow impact those consumer prices?
Yeah, look, it depends on the company. Different companies are doing different things. Look, there are companies who increased their prices before Trump even took office in expectation of tariffs. And we heard that on the earnings calls. Like, we're going to make sure that we start to collect a little bit of additional revenue now to protect ourselves from really high tariff prices to come. There are companies who had a lot of stock on the shelves when Trump announced tariffs on Liberation Day. And they said, hey, we're going to sell our existing stock at the pre-tariff price. And we're not going to raise prices until we have to, until we actually get our first shipment in at the new tariffed rate, and everything in between. So you're seeing a lot of folks who are offering deals, whether or not they're truly at the pre-tariff pricing. I think, that's probably maybe an unfair and deceptive pricing question for people like attorney generals to take a peek at. But definitely there's been a lot of advertising of come and get it while it's at the pre-tariff rate.
Well, Trump keeps saying that the tariffs are going to require more companies to source materials and manufacture their products in the U.S. Is this a fair assumption? And if it is it a fair assumption within a time frame that'll make a difference to people?
So Trump recently announced that he was going to do additional tariffs on smartphones. And the reason that he announced that is because Apple announced that they were going to move some of their manufacturing from China to India. And Trump wants that manufacturing to happen in the US, not China and not India. And so he announced this increase in tariff rates on smartphones to try to get companies like Apple to make more smartphones in the United States. Okay, that's fine in theory, right? That's a good use of tariffs. We're trying to bring back some of these manufacturing jobs to the United States. Well, Apple is only going to invest in additional manufacturing in the United States if it pencils out over the medium and long run. It's going to take some time to build up a plant here in the United States. As we've seen, as long as Tim Cook takes a couple of visits to the White House, takes a couple of visits to Mar-a-Lago, he can get the tariff rate changed. And that's how it has been working. And so I think it is very unlikely that we are going to see the types of additional manufacturing that he's hoping to see, the additional domestic manufacturing, and much more likely that nothing is going to change on this front because he isn't staying the course. And people have no faith or belief that he will stay the course. I mean, think about how many times he has blinked already. He announced the EU tariffs. He's already delayed them by a month. The reciprocal tariffs, they were on, then they were off. The high rates in China, now the lower rates on China. There's nothing about this strategy that puts together the conditions that would make it likely that we could actually do what he's hoping to do, which is, maybe a goal that a lot of us agree with, right?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that it kind of feels like is that if you have enough money and power and influence to get into Mar-a-Lago or the White House, you can get some better treatment on your tariffs. But what if you're a mid-sized or small importer? I mean, what about them? Last week, Trump threatened to put a 50% tariff on imports from the European Union and a 25% tariff on smartphones. You've already talked about that a little bit, but unless they're unless they're moved. Before, he was primarily focusing on China, Canada, and Mexico. What's going on here?
Yeah, look, I think Trump is clearly having difficulty. His administration is clearly having difficulty negotiating with the EU. I think he's frustrated with the pace of the talks. They're not going as well as he'd hoped. And so he made a big announcement threatening a big tariff rate to try to get the EU to come to the table. I don't have the best sense of how that's going, although we do know that already the start date for those EU tariffs has been delayed. It was going to initially be in June, and now they're talking about July. So maybe that means they're back at the table spending the next month or so negotiating. But that's what was going on with the EU tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. So tariffs aren't illegal, but if the government is going to do something we don't agree with, we do have tools to speak up. Back in April, a group of fellow state attorney generals and we sued Trump to block the executive orders that claim the power to increase tariffs worldwide without congressional approval. The case is still pending, and I believe we're going to win. But I wonder if I can get your take on a few items, such as what kinds of things can everyday consumer do to speak up for a better, more rational tariff policy?
Yeah, look, I do think consumer outrage, public frustration with this tariff policy is already bearing fruit in a couple of ways. The first way we'll talk about, which isn't how we usually think about these things, but I think is worth considering, is the market reaction to Trump's tariff announcement was incredibly poor, right? I mean, the downturn in the market was significant. And I don't think Americans interpreted that as sort of a corporate strike against trade policy. I think they worried about their retirement accounts. And I think a lot of people got pretty spooked and talked about it. So the first thing I'll say is I do think the market reaction, the negative market reaction was one reason I think Trump changed courses. We know from reporting that he was aware that the markets would react negatively, but he sort of thought maybe we would have a recession, and it started to look like maybe his trade policy on Liberation Day could cause a depression, and that was a bridge too far. I mean, that is a little bit horrific to think that he was like pricing in and totally fine with a recession, but a depression was a bridge too far. I mean, you know how devastating recessions are for millions of American families for the long haul.
Well, I think you and I worked together in the aftermath of a recession, didn't we? The 2008 recession.
Yeah. The second thing I'll say is I do think, public opinion here has been important, and Americans are sort of wildly opposed to Trump's tariffs, as well as very aware of them. More than 80% of Americans are tracking this issue. There are not a lot of issues that people track in Washington with those numbers. So this is really something that's not, this isn't a debate among economists. This is something the American people are tracking themselves very closely. We've also seen, calls into members of Congress on the Hill. And we've seen consumer activism, consumer boycotts. We've seen companies band together and stand up against the tariffs. Many of the, I mentioned the baby tax. A number of the baby manufacturers took out a full-page Washington Post ad saying, look, like this is enough, right? So we've seen corporate activism. We've seen consumer boycotts and consumer activism. We've seen market reactions, all of the above.
Well, thank you. People need to know what they can do. Now, speaking of what people can do, what about our colleagues in Congress? You and I both worked on the Hill. Congress has the power to stop Trump's tariffs, but they need to be pressured to do it, I guess. Do you think they'll step in and bring some rationality and sense to this situation?
There are a few different possibilities here. There was a bill right after Liberation Day that Ron Wyden and Elizabeth Warren, and I think they maybe had Rand Paul on it, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So bipartisan bill that would effectively have repealed the Trump tariffs. And they obviously weren't able to get that through. But I think, there have been attempts like that in Congress. There were also, I think, concerns and consideration around the fact that Congress should approve tariff policy. It shouldn't be done unilaterally by the executive. So there were some attempts in that vein as well. I think my understanding is that this particular suite of tariffs is possible by executive action, in part because Trump declared a national emergency. And so there actually will be potentially a point in time where he'll have to renew that emergency declaration, and that may be another opportunity when Congress could try to intervene again. But given the makeup of Congress right now, and how loyal they are to Trump, how afraid they are of getting crosswise with Trump, it seems relatively unlikely that Congress will intervene, but it's not impossible, and there are avenues.
Some of those economic populists and Republican independent types, they need to grow a spine, in my view. So let me just say, as we wrap up, do you have anything to share with our listeners about the long-term impacts of this economic instability that seems to be going on every day? I mean, does this just suddenly change? Does things go back just to normal if Trump somehow knocks it off? And if he doesn't and he keeps it up for the next 4 years, what will it mean for us economically?
I'll give two answers to that. The first is that the chaotic way in which Trump has wielded tariffs is going to make it very, very difficult for any future administration to use tariffs well or effectively. And that obviously is a really unfortunate outcome, in part because the Biden administration was doing a pretty good job on this, right? They had some smart interventions here to ensure that we could start building up our electric vehicle manufacturing capacity, for example.
And he attacked that. He's attacking we had to sue him over that too.
So I do really worry that he's undermined the credibility of the policy tool. And it's a tool that's really important. It's important for protecting essential American industries important to our national security and our economic strength. The second thing I'll say, and this one is a bit more of a jump ball, it's not something that I think necessarily goes in a negative direction, is I do think this period of high inflation followed by the announced tariffs means that Americans' focus on cost of living and affordability is going to be sky high for many, many years to come. Now, as you know, you've been focused on these issues way before inflation. These were always really important issues to Americans. But I think, it has just, every poll we see, cost of living is a top priority, affordability, prices, they are just going to be salient for a long, long time to come. And so that means for policymakers and for folks in the political arena, an agenda that really takes on prices and affordability is going to be essential. And a lot of people are going to give lip service to that kind of agenda. Every person who runs for president in the Dem Party is going to say they're going to lower costs. But I think and your listeners know, that the only real way to do that is to take on the companies who are raising them. And so there's going to have to be, I think, a real come to Jesus moment around how we are going to make things affordable for American families. And lip service isn't going to be enough. Naming the actors who are overcharging Americans, naming the pharmaceutical companies, taking them on one by one, I think is going to be essential to getting costs back down. But I don't think it's going away anytime soon. And so I think policy folks need to be thinking creatively about this. Candidates are going to have to be focused on putting together cost of living and affordability agendas and all of that.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, cutting the taxes of giant corporations and high net worth individuals does not help, because all they do is use the excess money to lobby Congress and get behind their favorite legislators who are not going to hold them accountable. So, these things all work together. Hey, Dr. Lindsay Owens, everybody, join me in thanking Dr. Lindsay Owens. And Lindsay, we'll see you next time. And if anybody wants to see more of the work that Groundwork Collaborative does, you can go to their website at groundworkcollaborative.org. So folks, whether you are concerned about the price of fruits and vegetables or coffee, or the price of grills or strollers or electronics, or whether you're worried about the price of clothes or automobile parts, we are looking at a period of time where, because of these tariffs and other factors, we're looking at a more challenging political environment. Folks, there's nothing inherently wrong with tariffs. In fact, I've been complaining about U.S. trade policy for years. I even opposed Obama trade policy on the Trans-Pacific Partnership that he was trying to do with the United States and other countries in the Pacific region. So I'm okay with a little bit more fair trade as opposed to just free trade. But I always wanted it to be done competently. This erratic, up and down, irrational, on again, off again, here again, there again, tariff policy of the Trump administration is nothing but inflationary. And it's causing a lot of problems to a lot of families, whether they're trying to buy baby formula and strollers or clothes for the kids, or whether you're a farmer trying to buy things like fertilizer and potash for inputs into your farm. This trade policy doesn't make any sense. And one of the worst things about it, friends, is that if you are an oligarch like Tim Cook, you can just go to Mar-a-Lago, or you can just go to the White House and cut yourself out your own special little deal. Your average person can't do that. Your average business can't even do that. So it's really unfair and driven by the oligarchs all over again. So look, pay attention to this economy, and you can do that by tuning in to Affording Your Life with Attorney General Keith Ellison. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you very much.